Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Just want to remind you to click on that like icon, subscribe, and do the bell icon if you'd like to get notifications of upcoming uh, releases by us. And we appreciate your ongoing support of our broadcast.
So each week, we're going to be covering the gospel lectionary reading for the upcoming weekend. And our goal is to talk about that in the spirit of, or in the context of love and inclusion and societal justice. And our hope is that our talking will be just in the our conversation will be just in the sense of justice, but that also something will be said during this brief conversation that might inspire you to do more than just talking this week.
So today we're continue in Eastertide with John chapter 10. And this passage is, at first blush, not a lot to it, but I think there's some interesting nuggets that, as we dive in a little bit deeper, I think there's still some gold to mine from it. And so we're just going to get into it and see what we can uh, discover together. So, Herb, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so I know that the imagery in the other gospels is Jesus as the shepherd. In this reading this week, there's a subtle shift. The Jesus is the sheep gate through which shepherds lead the sheep in and out of the sheep pen. Jesus is kind of the conduit for the Johannine community to lead uh, people into that greater knowledge, that
Mm-hmm,
gnosis that we've been
mm-hmm.
talking about over the last few weeks. So I know that the focus is on Jesus as the gate rather than the shepherd, but I do want to talk about that shepherd imagery for just a moment because it's related. Um, there's a passage in Ezekiel that I wrote about this week that if I could, I'm going to try to share my screen here and see if that works. It's a rather lengthy passage. It's more than just, here, let me read it for you type of a passage. See if that works.
There we go.
There we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
All right. So this is Ezekiel 34:23 through 31. And it states, I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. He will tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. I will make a covenant of peace with them and rid the land of savage beasts so that they may live in the wilderness and sleep in the forests in safety. I will make them and the places surrounding my hill a blessing. I will send down showers in season. There will be showers of blessing. The trees will yield their fruit and the ground will yield its crops. The people will be secure in their land. They will know that I am the Lord when I break the bars of their yoke and rescue them from the hands of those who enslaved them. They will no longer be plundered by the nations, nor will wild animals devour them. They will live in safety, and no one will make them afraid. I will provide for them a land renowned for its crops, and they will no longer be victims of famine in the land or bear the scorn of the nations. Then they will know that I, the Lord their God, am with them, and that they, the Israelites, are my people, declares the sovereign Lord. You are my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, and I am your God, declares the sovereign Lord. So, what I want us to see from that passage is that the original Jewish kind of prophetic, the Hebrew prophetic justice tradition, that vein, used the imagery of shepherd a little differently than the way it's used today. Christians today, when we talk about Jesus being the shepherd and we're Jesus' sheep, and it's kind of cute and cuddly, and it's warm and fuzzy, and it's personal, it's private, it's individualized, it's about having a relationship with Jesus, just you yourself. But the original imagery in the Hebrew prophets was much more political, much more liberation themed. It was about setting injustice, setting oppression, and setting violence to right. It was about liberating the people and them being brought as a community into an experience of not just surviving but thriving, free of oppression, free of violence, free of injustice. And I find that interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what you see again and again in the Hebrew scriptures is when the Jewish people are in trouble, God promises a new shepherd. And and using that imagery of the Davidic line of, David being seen as the prototype king, the true king of Israel in the way that he has been portrayed as ruling over the people, that anybody that follows would follow in that same spirit as David, who before he became king of Israel was himself a shepherd, an actual shepherd. And so that's that kind of same shepherding imagery coming from David, moving from a shepherd to a king, that the future leaders, future deliverers would lead in that same way. So there is that always that hope that God that comes to Israel through the promise of a new shepherd who do that work of liberation. And so Jesus is definitely taking on that same imagery, and John using that same imagery in the writing of this passage.
Yeah, and you find the same thing, and I won't take time to read this one, but for anybody who might be interested, you find the same emphasis in Micah 5, 2 through 5, that where the shepherd once again has been privatized in our our religious spiritual kind of experience today, about all again about having this relationship with Jesus. It was much more it was much more in harmony with the themes of what maybe liberation theology would teach
Mm-hmm.
in our context today. It was much more about freeing a people
Right.
from
Very
oppression.
collectivist.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And to the sheepgate part, I mean, again, I feel like with John, and John is just problematic in so many ways when it comes to this specific topic. Whenever Jesus takes on the scribes or the Pharisees in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's about the way the elites were using their positions of power to take advantage of the masses, to take advantage of the people. And it's Jewish voices arguing with other Jewish voices about what is just in their society. By
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
time we get to John, it's Christians versus Jews. And this is
Mm-hmm.
another one of those. The whole reason it's here is the Johannine community, this proto Gnostic Johannine community, is really passing judgment on the Pharisees, saying that Jesus is the sheep gate. If you're not leading people to knowledge through Jesus, then the people that get to the sheep without going through that gate, they're
Mm-hmm.
hopping the fence, they're hopping over the wall,
Yeah.
they're the thieves, they're the bad guys, and I don't think that, I mean, I understand the anti-Semitism that was there in the church, or within the Johannine community at this time, but I just don't think it's at all. I don't think it's a fair assessment of the Pharisees to say that they were thieves and that they were only out for personal gain.
Right.
I don't think
Or
it's.
or a fair assessment of Jesus' view of them, that he's viewing them as this dangerous. I think John is putting this language on Jesus to say, this is
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I'm telling you, John is making Jesus exclusivist,
Yeah,
and Jesus is not trying to be exclusivist. At least what we see in the synoptics. And
that's
so
right.
this is John putting upon Jesus this exclusivist cloak that I don't think that we see outside of John.
A really great book is by Harvey Falk, Falk. It's titled Jesus the Pharisee: A New Look at the Jewishness of Jesus. And to pit Jesus versus the Pharisees and to always use the term Pharisee pejoratively, it's an oversimplification of what we know to be historically true about the Pharisees. There were two groups of Pharisees, and I don't think, or two schools of thought, or two schools of the Pharisees, rather. And I don't think either one was nefarious. The school of Shammai, I mean, not to geek out a little bit here for a moment, but the school of Shammai, they were concerned with preserving Jewish identity. And so they were much more strict in their observance. I think it was rightly motivated, but it's where some of the more, um, exclusivist
Mm-hmm.
interpretations of the Torah come from, that Jesus, the exclusionary applications of the Torah that Jesus was focusing against in the synoptic gospels. But the school of Hillel, I mean, Jesus had a lot in common with the school of Hillel that defined Torah observance as loving one's neighbor, and that,
Mm-hmm.
the whole law could be kept just in the living out the treating others the way that you would like to be treated. What I find fascinating on the subject of divorce, and we've talked about this before, out of Jesus's concern for social justice for women,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus's position on divorce would have been much more in harmony with the school of Shammai. His position on love being the definition of Torah observance, he would have been in the position of he would have been in agreement with Hillel. And Hillel was responsible too for the prosbul. So we can't just say that Jesus was, a Hillelian Pharisee either, because Jesus wanted to reinstitute the year of Jubilee where all debts were canceled. And it
Yeah.
was Hillel that came up with, well, there are certain loans you can exclude from that and not have them canceled to protect, those who made those loans. Hillel was about love, but he was classist. And Shammai, much more conservative. But again, on things like divorce, Jesus agreed with him. So I just think it's a much more complicated relationship for Jesus and the Pharisees than what the Gospel of John treats it as. It's just
Yeah.
oversimplified in the Gospel of John, and it makes Jewish people look like they're just a bunch of legalists. And that has been a traditional characterization
That's
of the Jewish people by Christians. It comes from the Gospel of John, and it's just not fair. It's not true, and it's not fair.
right. Yeah, it's just like saying the same thing that all Muslims are jihadists. It's just patently false, and it ignores all the complexity of the wide variety of people who make up that faith tradition. It's the same thing within the Jewish tradition, and John again is just too simplistic with throwing everybody under the bus, uh, and not. But John's purpose is clear. This Gnostic, proto Gnostic, wherever he is, wherever John's writers are in the development of this type of thought, they are anti-materialist, and so everybody who is anyway still in the material world, in the now
Right.
world, John is on a mission to go against that, and to make it clear that there is one way to the afterlife. There is one way to the ethereal kingdom of God, and that's only through the name Jesus, and that's why Jesus is put here as the gate.
Yeah, and again, well, I think it fails on two things. First of all, this is the Johannines version of Jesus.
Right.
The synoptic, I don't know which one was the historical one, if either one was the historical one, the synoptics versus the Johannine Jesus. But we can at least say that the Johannine Jesus is different than the synoptic Jesus
Yeah.
in the same sacred text. They're two different versions of the same of Jesus. And this is their picture where Jesus was about, like you said, ushering them into the 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 liberating the spirit from the physical material and
Hmm.
flesh body, and downplaying all the concrete material stuff. But two, it doesn't work today. I mean, we are striving for a world today that's safe for everyone, that's just for everyone, that's compassionate for everyone, a world that's big enough to hold all of our differences without us killing each other over our differences, an end of violence. That's what we should be striving toward, a multi ethnic, a diverse, but also a multi-faith world. I mean, we live in a democracy that should have rich variations in it today,
Hmm.
and I mean, for it's time for us to evolve past viewing other religions as evil and our religion as the only right one, and for us
Right.
to realize that all faiths have things that are life-giving and things that are death-dealing, and the goal is to collect all the life-giving stuff and to foster that. I don't want anybody to just become a blanket Christian if that means taking in all the areas that Christianity is
Right.
not life-giving too.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's about, so again, making Jesus this sheep gate, this exclusive sheep gate that, unless you're passing through Jesus, I just, it doesn't work for me today.
But if in order to redeem this passage, really, is you have to say, okay, if you can take the message of the synoptic Jesus and let that be the gate, not the belief in a literal Jesus, but if you could say Jesus' message of liberation, a message of liberation, a message of inclusion, a message of dignity to the outsider and the outcast, that these messages, which are not exclusive to Jesus, but that Jesus highly prioritized, at least in the Synoptic Gospels, if you say, though that message is the gate through
Yeah,
which,
I could do that.
then you can come to a place and say, is through that lens, that portal that Jesus showed us, the way, even to even use John's language, the way, the truth, and the life, not Jesus, the belief in a literal Jesus as Messiah, but what Jesus taught and what Jesus modeled,
The
that
ethics and values of
the
the Jesus
ethics,
story.
everything
Yeah.
that brought life to people, that brought hope to those who were outside of the power structure, that can resonate. It's not what John means at all, but
No.
you can say, to redeem this passage, you can try to switch out the parts and say, yeah, no, this this gateway of justice and inclusion and and love for all is
Yeah.
is
If we
is the portal forward that Jesus was trying to reveal to us.
if we define the gate simply as love, and I don't mean
Hmm.
love in a sentimental way, but love the way that folks like Cornel West would say that justice is what love looks like in public.
Hmm.
A love expressed through compassion, inclusion, love, justice, those things, safety for everyone. If we define that as the gate, then of course, those who pass through that gain knowledge and
Yes.
experience and wisdom, and
Yes.
and all of a sudden they're safe to set in motion in the world, hoping that they will actually make the world a better place. And then this, I mean, there's an intrinsic value in this now, rather than just it being, yeah, yeah,
But
just the
it's,
literal Jesusness.
yeah. But yet, like you said, we see so many strains of our conservative Christian faith tradition going the complete opposite direction, and still very much an exclusivist,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus only message, and completely, just completely unaware. I think you and I were in a conversation earlier today where someone had attended a church gathering. They were telling us where they had attended a church gathering, and part of the conversation, or during the conversation, someone brought up, I really feel like we should be talking about the immigration crisis at the border. And the leader of the discussion shut it down and said, we're supposed to be talking about Jesus.
Yeah.
And
right. Let's lift up Jesus. Let's not talk about how people are suffering.
And there's this completely lack of awareness or willing unawareness of how loving others is intrinsically tied to Jesus. When you talk about those who are suffering, you are talking about Jesus. You are talking about
how can you focus on Jesus and not walk away from that? And I'm sure it's done, I know it's done, but it's such a disconnect to not be, to look at Jesus and then look away and not be concerned about people who are being put in cages on the border.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So
where I do agree with this passage, where I do resonate with it, is that Jesus came to give us life and life more abundant. And I qualify that abundant life because, the way capitalism provides abundance is always at the expense of someone else. But Jesus's idea of abundance is life that's life for everybody. That if it's not life for everybody, then it's not life. It's not life at someone else's expense. It's not life that comes through someone else's death. It's just life for everyone. And the other passage I wanted to share this week, Todd, in our conversation, if I could share the screen one more time. I have been getting a lot of life this post-Easter season from the work of Dolores Williams. And I think in this context, especially how you earlier defined the gate as the ethics or the love that Jesus taught, I love this passage. This is from Sisters in the Wilderness, The Challenge of Womanist God Talk, page 130 through 131. This is Dolores Williams. It seems more intelligent, more scriptural to understand that redemption had to do with God through Jesus giving humankind new vision to see the resources for positive, abundant relational life. Redemption had to do with God through the ministerial vision giving humankind the ethical thought and practice upon which to build positive, productive quality of life. Hence, the kingdom of God theme in the ministerial vision of Jesus does not point to death. It's not something one has to die to reach. So she's talking about afterlife here. Rather, the kingdom of God is a metaphor of hope God gives those attempting to right the relations between self and self, between self and others, and between self and God, as prescribed in the Sermon on the Mount, the Golden Rule, and the commandment to show love above all else. If we make those the gate, then it makes perfect sense to me why Jesus would say, I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly.
Yes.
That resonates. That's the sheep gate.
Yeah. And that message of Jesus is still compelling to a world today. I'm telling you, the message of an exclusivist Jesus is falling on deaf ears for those of us who are who function as clergy or other leaders in our local congregations, who are thinking about how do we continue to share the gospel with the world. The sharing a traditional reading of John gospel with the world is not being taken in anymore, and it shouldn't. It should not be taken in as you need to come to this religion because we're the right ones. We're the pathway to the afterlife. That message does not work. It should not work.
It bears bad fruit. It's death dealing.
It only divides. It only keeps people apart. It turns into forms of Christian nationalism. It turns into forms of personal piety and superiority over over our behavior over somebody else's. It's just it's it,
We need things in
rampant.
life that are going to remind us and emphasize for us how interconnected and a part of one another we are. Whether we like it or not, you're part of me, I'm part of you. We either thrive together or we don't. But nobody, I love what um, uh, Jackie Lewis is that? Man, I'm blanking. I'm gonna have to find it. I'll get it for you by next week. But the idea that if there is such a thing as salvation, societal salvation, that none of us are saved until all of us are saved. That
Hmm.
we're all connected, we're all part, we all share each other's fate. We need things that remind us and foster that way of looking at the world. What you're describing, Todd, doesn't produce anything but me judging other people, whether they're in or out or measuring up. And what it leads to eventually is marginalizing or excluding someone. And that's just at best. At worst, the fruit that has borne is people who think they're in the right or in the right religion
Hmm.
killing people who are not part of
Right.
them. That's the worst fruit that it can produce. And it's
And
time just
whether
to leave it behind, to outgrow it.
Yeah. And if you say, well, that sounds extreme for Herb to say that it would lead to people actually being willing to kill other people for the sake of the message. You don't have to go back further than January 6th,
Right.
21. You don't
Right.
have to go back any earlier than that to see that at work. And even if you say, well, I wouldn't go around killing somebody for my exclusivist belief in Jesus, we all have brought so many of us have in our traditions bought into the idea that God is going to slaughter millions of people at the eschatological judgment because they don't believe in Jesus. We've been raised in that tradition, and it gives us license to be prejudiced and to be hateful, and it allows us to create a monstrous God who would do that to anybody who doesn't have the right code word, the right secret handshake, the right uh, uh, special key
Belief system. Yeah.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
get
Yeah.
into the afterlife, and that key is Jesus. It's just it teaches so many horrible things, and we've bought into so much of it for so long as Christians.
I didn't plan on doing this, Todd. I swear I didn't. But I happen to have a copy of my new book on my desk right now. Here's my shameless plug.
Hey, I've
Um,
read the book. It's a good book. I no need to be humble or false humble about it. It's worth bragging about.
in the appendix of that book, there's a large section that treats this very subject, and that's the only reason I bring it up. There is a way, and I go into it in the book, of interpreting the sheep and the goats that doesn't divide us and separate us, but the traditional way of labeling some people as sheep and others as goats does exactly what you're
Hmm.
describing, and it's time for us to leave it behind.
Absolutely.
So
By the
again,
way,
what
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say again, the abundant life that Jesus came, the thriving that Jesus came to show us the path of. It's life for everybody. That it's just I was just going
Yeah.
to say that it's if it's not life for everybody, then it's not the kind of life Jesus was talking about. There is a kind of thriving and abundance that comes at other people's expense. But that's not what the
No.
prosperity gospel is, not what's being referenced here.
No. No. And I think you can go down this path and you can think about what would it look like to live out as followers of Jesus, to live out this very inclusive uh, uh, way of living that draws in people from other traditions, other faiths, other political parties, all the thing, and say, well, then what do we have left to identify us as Christians? And I would say, you know what? Let's let's be willing to risk that for the sake of actually heading in the direction of what Christ has been calling us to. Uh, let's find the abundant life that and wrestle with what that means for staying in our sectarian boxes along the way. Um,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
might mean
They'll know.
I lose a job along the way, but maybe that was kind of the whole point all along.
I mean, that's the one thing that the Johannine community gets right is that they'll know that you're my disciples by your love, right? But it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't say that only Jesus' disciples, they'll be the only ones that are loving.
Right.
So yeah, I mean
Right.
that's the key.
Yeah.
Well,
Got
cool,
anything
man.
else for us, sir?
That's all I got this week, Todd. There are some, like you said, some redeemable nuggets in this passage.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that I see there.
So there's some good stuff. Well, hey, tell us where people can find you and where they can find your book.
All right, you can find me at renewedheartministries.com, and amazingly enough, you can find my book there too, renewedheartministries.com. And if you want the book, just hit the store link at the top. Otherwise, there's a whole plethora of resources there on that website. Todd, where can they find you?
I have no books, but you can find me at toddjleonard.com or at my church website, glendalecitychurch.org. So thanks again for joining us, everybody. We love having this conversation. And please make sure to add your comments below. We'd love to hear from you and what you're thinking about. Pushback, challenge with us, dialogue with us. We'd love to hear from you. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.